Hello and welcome to this session on licensing the modern desktop. My name's Louise Ulrich and it's my pleasure to take you through these slides. They support the module with the same name in the Microsoft Licensing Solutions Specialist accreditation at getlicensingready.com, and if you need reference material you'll find handouts at that site as well. In this session we'll focus on the components of the modern desktop, and of course that's Windows 10 and Office 2016. You probably know that Windows and Office always used to be licensed on a per device basis, but changes over the last couple of years have meant that they can now be licensed on a per user basis if that suits an organisation better. And we're going to look at both of these licensing models for the products, and that will include looking at the licensing of Office 365 Pro Plus and Office 365 Business, since that's the way that organisations license Office per user. First of all, however, we're going to start with some general information that applies both to Windows 10 and Office 2016. I want to cover several different topics in this section. First of all, we'll look at the different channels through which Windows and Office may be purchased. Then we'll look at how you would find the product use rights that apply to the products, dependent on how they've been acquired. And finally, we'll cover the notion of product activation and why that's important. Let's start by considering the different ways that a license for Windows or Office may be acquired. And the first way is by buying the software as boxed products. This is known as full packaged product and is purchased from retailers. Now, typically, if you buy software in this way, then buying one box gives you one license. There are some benefits to buying software in this way. You can walk into a store and purchase a software and take it home straight away. And it's convenient if you want to buy a single copy of the software. However, this way of acquiring software is really aimed at consumers, and businesses will find this is likely to be the most expensive way of acquiring multiple licenses for software. And it's also harder to manage from a software asset management point of view, since you do need to keep just about all of the packaging as proof of license. The next way you could acquire licenses for Windows or Office is pre-installed on a new computer, and of course this is through the OEM channel. Now this is often a really cost-effective way actually for both consumers and businesses to purchase software, and of course it's popular because of that. However, there's an important restriction to be aware of. The software is tied to the device on which it is pre-installed, and in fact you may have heard the phrase, the software lives and dies on the PC. And that means that if you retire the PC for any reason, then the software that was bought with it is retired too. And the final way in which Windows and Office licenses can be purchased, well, that's through volume licensing, of course. And you'll probably be aware that there's a whole host of different volume licensing programs to suit all kinds of organisations, and there are a couple mentioned here on the slide. There are many benefits to buying licenses through volume licensing programs, which include, among others, discounts for buying multiple licenses, as well as additional rights such as downgrade rights or re-imaging rights, for example. We've seen that there are different ways that customers can acquire licenses for Windows and Office, and the next thing we need to turn our attention to is the product use rights for those licenses, because it's important to realise that how a product may be used will vary not only by the product itself, but also by the route through which the license was purchased. So where do you go to check the usage rights for any software that you may have acquired? Well, here you can see links to the various documents and websites that give access to these rights. For FPP and OEM, you go to the website that you can see the link for on the slide here, and there you fill in an online form choosing whether you've purchased your software as FPP or pre-installed, and then you select the version and edition of the software, and finally a PDF document is generated for you which contains all the usage terms. For volume licensing, there are some documents that are generated on a monthly basis that document the use rights. For on-premises software, and that would include Windows 10 and Office Professional Plus 2016, for example, you use the product terms document. And for any online services, you use the online services terms document. And it's this document, of course, that would cover Office 365 Pro Plus and Office 365 Business. You can see the links here if you want to download those documents to have a look at. Another important aspect of purchasing Windows and Office licenses is the concept of activation. And product activation is technology that ensures that software is only installed on devices or used by users for which it is licensed. For instance, if you were to buy a Windows 10 license as a full package product, you may only install that software on one device, and it's product activation that enforces this licensing restriction. Windows and Office purchased through FPP and OEM must be activated, and this can be done either via the internet or over the telephone. And in the case of OEM software, the system builder can activate the software before the computer is delivered to the customer. So how does activation work? Well, a product key is supplied when the software is purchased with FPP or OEM software, and it's this that is used to unlock the code and allow the installation of the software. With Office 365 Pro Plus, it's even easier. The product itself communicates with the Office licensing service and the activation and validation service to obtain and activate a product key. But it is worth noting at this point that an Office 365 user is required to be connected to the internet at least once every 30 days so that the service can extend the product key. What about activation for licenses acquired through a volume licensing program? Well, obviously an IT professional doesn't really have the time to activate each copy of Windows and Office manually, so there is a different process for activating this software, and it's called volume activation. It's Windows 10 and Office Standard or Professional Plus 2016 which are the products that need to be activated when they're purchased through volume licensing programs, and there is a choice for organisations as to how they can do this. The Multiple Activation Key, or MAC, activates products on a one-time basis using Microsoft's hosted activation services, while the Key Management Service, or KMS, allows organisations to activate products within their own network. And you can see that using this last method, the products do need to be reactivated against the internal server every 180 days. Now, customers obtain both the MAC and the KMS keys at the Volume Licensing Service Centre, or if they've purchased their licenses through the MPSA, then they would use the new portal associated with that agreement, the Microsoft Volume Licensing Centre, or MVLC. However, it's now time to get some more specific information on Windows 10, and that of course is the latest version of the Microsoft Windows Client Operating System. And I said at the start of this session that Windows and Office can be licensed by device or user these days, and in this section I want to start by looking at device licensing for Windows and then extend it to user licensing. There are three main editions of Windows 10, and you can see them on this slide here: Windows 10 Home, Windows 10 Pro and Windows 10 Enterprise. And the arrow at the side shows that the functionality in the product increases as you go from Windows 10 Home to the Pro edition, with Enterprise of course offering the most features. You can see that a home user is likely to choose between Windows 10 Home and Windows 10 Pro, while a business user should opt for either Windows 10 Pro or the Enterprise edition. And the little pictures show how the different editions can be acquired. So for the home user, you can see that either edition can be purchased as a full package product or pre-installed on a new PC. Whereas looking at the business column, we see that the Windows 10 Pro can also be purchased through a volume licensing program, and in fact this is the only way that the Enterprise edition may be bought. We said on the previous slide that the functionality increases as you go up through the editions, and here you can see some of the key features pulled out for us to compare the editions. The main differentiators between Windows 10 Home and Pro is the ability to join a domain for business networking and BitLocker for disk encryption, so you can see why it's the recommended edition for businesses. Enterprise Edition has of course even more features, and they're all to do with performance or manageability or security, and many businesses find that these additional features make the Enterprise Edition a good choice for them. Typically it's the latest version of the software that is sold, but what if you want to buy a new license for a device or a user but to install an earlier version of the software? Now, this is known as exercising downgrade rights, and these rights change dependent on how the licenses are purchased. Let's take a look. If you buy Windows through the FPP channel, then you can see that this is absolutely not a benefit that's available to you. What about OEM? Well, with OEM, you have limited downgrade rights, and you can see that if you bought Windows 10 Pro today, then you could downgrade to either Windows 8 or 8.1 Pro or Windows 7 Professional. And it's probably no surprise to you that volume licensing gives the greatest flexibility in downgrade rights. And of course, that's actually one of the benefits of purchasing licenses through a volume licensing program. And here we can see if a customer has a license for Windows 10 Pro, then they can install the equivalent edition to the Pro edition all the way back to Windows 95. And for customers with the Enterprise edition, well, that gives rights to all of the editions that you see here. Let's drill into a little bit more detail regarding purchasing Windows 10 through the volume licensing programs. And as a reminder, we've said that customers can acquire both the Pro or Enterprise editions. And what we see here is that if they buy the Enterprise edition, then they can choose to add software assurance at the time of purchase. Now, more on software assurance in a moment. There is, however, one other important detail that we do need to cover, and that is that the licenses that are purchased through volume licensing are upgrade licenses only, and that means that there needs to be a qualifying underlying operating system on a device before a volume licensing license can be assigned to it. Now, most usually this will be an OEM license, and many of the current and previous business editions of Windows are qualifying operating systems in the commercial volume licensing agreements. It's time now to have a look at the extra benefits that customers receive if they add software assurance to their Windows 10 Enterprise licenses. Now, we can split the benefits into two main areas, the first of which is additional functionality. If you've added software assurance to a Windows 10 Enterprise license, then you're entitled to use MDOP. Now, what's that? Well, MDOP stands for the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack, and it's a set of technologies for IT professionals to optimize and manage the desktop. The other types of benefits are around deployment flexibility. Actually, when you buy a Windows 10 Enterprise license without SA, you're allowed to install the software in the traditional way, that is, directly on the machine and use it. As soon as you add SA, however, you're allowed to install it in new ways, and we're going to take a look at some of those now. The first thing you can do is to use Windows 10 in a VDI or virtual desktop infrastructure scenario, and that's where Windows 10 runs in a virtual machine on a server and it's used by a user on a licensed device. However, you can imagine that this gets really expensive if the user uses lots of devices at home, for example, to access their virtual desktop. And this is where the roaming rights come in. The user of a machine that has a Windows 10 Enterprise license with SA can then use any other third-party owned machine while he's outside the office to access his virtual desktop. Then there are rights to use Windows in a Windows to Go environment, and this is where a user has a USB stick with his organisation's corporate Windows image on it, and when he goes to a licensed device, he can use Windows from that USB stick. And the final thing we see here as an SA benefit is access to the long-term servicing branch. Now let's go on to the next slide to find out more about branches. Now, you may have been surprised that I didn't talk about that most famous of SA benefits, new version rights, on the previous slide, where you're licensed to deploy a later version of Windows if it becomes available while you have SA. And that's because things were a little bit different with Windows 10. So let's take a look. If I were to ask you what the next version of Windows will be after Windows 10, what would you say? Now, you may actually know what the answer is, Windows 10. That's because we've gone to a Windows as a service model now, such that the operating system will be continuously updated and we won't be waiting for example, Windows 11 to get new features. Now, I should mention at this point there are two main types of updates that we expect as users to Windows: feature updates and security updates. Security updates work the way they always have. We get those on a monthly rhythm. But the feature updates are no longer saved for a couple of years until a new version is due. They're delivered to users a few times a year, perhaps every 3 or 4 months. And devices that get feature updates this frequently are said to be on the current branch. And you'll note here that the updates are free, so users no longer need software assurance to get feature updates to their Windows operating system. Note also, however, that these free updates are mandatory. You have to install these updates and keep your machine up to date so that you can continue to get the best possible experience from Windows. All Windows 10 Home machines are on this branch, and Windows 10 Pro machines can choose to be. But what about businesses that feel nervous about feature updates being delivered to their users' devices this frequently? Well, the current branch for business was designed for them. This allows them to defer upgrades for about 8 months, during which time they can do whatever testing they need to. However, after that point, they do need to deploy these updates too, but again, they're free. And this option is available for Windows 10 Pro devices. And the final branch is the long-term servicing branch that we saw mentioned on the previous slide. This branch delays the delivery of the new features for a couple of years, and this is for organisations that need their environment to change very infrequently, and being on this branch will achieve this. Now, you can see that I haven't mentioned Windows 10 Enterprise at all so far, and obviously we do need to look at that. Now, remember that with Windows 10 Enterprise, you can either buy it just as a license, or you can buy it as a license with a software assurance. And let me reveal how it works with the branches. Well, you can see here that if you buy a Windows 10 Enterprise license without SA, you get no feature updates at all. You're essentially on the long-term servicing branch at a fixed point in time that will never change unless, of course, you buy a new license. And if you do have SA, then you can choose any of the branches above, which includes the long-term servicing branch, but you're entitled, of course, to use a new long-term servicing branch edition as and when it's released. So, as you'd expect, in a business, adding SA gives the ultimate in choice. Now, so far we've been looking at device licensing for Windows, and we've said that the best choice for businesses is the Enterprise Edition with software assurance. But a Windows license acquired through a volume licensing program requires an underlying license. What happens when we want to use Enterprise Edition with all of its SA benefits, but we've got a thin client device that doesn't have a qualifying operating system? Well, that's where the VDA license comes in. This is a device-based license, but it's a subscription, and you can see it's ideal for a thin client device when you don't have a qualifying operating system, but you still want access to the Enterprise Edition features and all the deployment flexibility. And you should consider these licenses as equivalents when you're choosing how to license devices in an organisation. If you've got PCs, choose Windows 10 Enterprise plus SA, and if you've got thin clients, then choose VDA. And if you've got a mixture of devices, then it's fine to mix the licenses too. It's now time to have a look at how Windows can be licensed by user. You can imagine how useful this option is for businesses whose users use Windows on a lot of devices. If you're licensing each device, then this is going to get expensive, as well as really difficult to keep track of all the devices that a user might choose to use. So there are now options to license Windows by user. Here you can see that there are actually 3 choices, and they're all user subscription licenses, or USLs, and we're going to look at the differences between them on the next slide, but think of them all again as alternatives to the Windows Enterprise plus SA licenses we've just looked at. They allow the use of the Enterprise Edition, and they allow the deployment flexibility and all of the other SA benefits. So let's start with the situation that many customers find themselves in. They've got devices with a qualifying operating system, and they've licensed them with Windows Enterprise with SA. Then they want to support initiatives like letting their users use their own devices, and they realise that user licensing would be more useful. What can they do? Well, this is where they would buy a Windows SA per user add-on USL for the primary user of the licensed device, and this essentially usifies the licensing of Windows for that user. Then let's take a customer who has devices with a qualifying operating system, but he hasn't in the past licensed them with SA. What can he buy? Well, here he can buy the full Windows SA per user USL for the primary user of his devices with a qualifying operating system. And this again usifies the licensing of Windows for that user. And what VDA options are there? Well, what about the customer who has thin clients and he's bought VDA device licenses for them, but now wants to usify the licensing of Windows? Well, you know that Windows SA per user add-on, the grey license we just looked at? Well, in fact, this can also be bought for the primary user of VDA device license devices as well. Now, have a look at the options we've seen here. They all include a device. What about the customer who really doesn't want to have to track devices or their primary users and just wants a pure licensing model for Windows? Well, that's our final option here, where we can see that we can buy the VDA USL for a user, and they are then licensed for Windows and can use Windows in all the ways that we've talked about. Our final slide for Windows looks at the availability of the various Windows licenses that we've been talking about. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on this slide. It's a reference for you as much as anything, but I would like to point out a couple of bits. Note that none of the user licensing options are yet available through the Open or Open Value programs. And note that, as you would in fact expect, none of the without SA options are available through the Open Value or Enterprise Agreement programs. Let's now look at some licensing details for Office 2016. Let's start by looking at the different editions of Office 2016 that are available, and here you can see the editions that a customer could purchase as a full package product or pre-installed on a new device. And you'll see that they vary by the products that are in them, with Word, Excel, PowerPoint and OneNote being products that these days are available in all editions. Users, of course, choose which edition suits them best by the products that they need to use day to day, and they receive the rights to install the product on a single device or use the product on the device on which it was pre-installed. And here are the editions available when Office 2016 is purchased through a volume licensing program, Standard and Professional Plus. You can see that Professional Plus has the largest collection of products, and it's aimed at business users who need to collaborate with their co-workers, as it contains products such as Skype for Business for instant messaging and web conferencing. However, the applications within Office Professional Plus 2016 are also enabled for enhanced server integration with products like SharePoint Server, and that means it could give Office users an integrated content management solution, or perhaps allow them to publish their spreadsheets to the web. Software assurance can be added to either edition of Office purchased through volume licensing, so Standard or Professional Plus, and it gives, as you would expect, a whole host of benefits. Now, one of them is the roaming rights we saw with Windows. So if Office was installed on the virtual desktops that we looked at before, as long as the customer had software assurance, they would also be licensed for Office roaming rights and thus able to access Office from any third-party device outside of the company offices. Another useful SA benefit, though, is the ability to purchase step-up licenses. And this means that if a customer originally purchased Office Standard with SA, but then wanted to move to Office Professional Plus, they could do so without having to purchase brand new Office Professional Plus licenses. The cost of the step-up license is just the difference in price between the license with SA price of Office Standard and Office Professional Plus. And what about adding software assurance to licenses purchased through the retail channels? Well, there's just one option that you can add software assurance to, and it's the Professional Edition purchased through the OEM channel. Now, SA has to be added within 90 days of the OEM purchase, and the rights are to Office Standard 2016 within volume licensing. But don't forget, when a customer has SA, they could choose to buy a step-up license to move from the Standard to Professional Plus editions if that was what they actually needed. Let's now cover some other licensing points very specific to Office. Here we have a reminder that Office so far is licensed with the device licensing model, And that also applies to the desktop applications such as Visio that aren't part of the Office suite. And as you know, Office is a collection of products, and people often wonder if the products could be split between several devices. Now have a look at the example here. The customer's purchased Office Professional Plus, and they've installed Word, Excel and Outlook on the left-hand machine, and PowerPoint, OneNote and Publisher on the other machine. Is this okay since the same products aren't used twice? Well, of course it's not. Office is a suite license, and that means that a single license is assigned to a device and the components must be installed on that device. So you can see here that 2 licenses are required, of course, 1 for each machine. And finally, Office allows downgrade rights by individual products. So here's a lady who has the latest version of Outlook installed, so that's the blue O icon on her device. But if required, the organisation could install the previous version of that product if that was important for their business needs. This slide shows you some of the different usage rights by channel, and you can see at a glance that by far the most usage rights are available when you purchase Office through a volume licensing programme. Let's take a closer look at the individual usage rights. The first row deals with license reassignment, so the right to install the software on one device and then to uninstall and use the software on another device. If you buy the software pre-installed, then you can't do this, but you can through the other channels, although, for example, within the volume licensing programs, it is restricted to reinstalling or reassigning once every 90 days. Downgrade rights are only available if licenses are purchased through a volume licensing program, so customers who need to purchase new licenses but install a previous version do have to acquire their licenses in this way. Portable use rights are another use right unique to volume licensing licenses, and these allow Office to be installed on a secondary portable device. Now there is an exception to this actually. When the volume licensing agreement is a company-wide one, this right isn't available. Let's take the next 2 rows together since they're both about deployment flexibility. If organisations want to deploy Office as part of a Windows To Go desktop on a USB stick, or to install Office on a server and have users use it from there, then the Office licenses must have been purchased through a volume licensing agreement. So although technically FPP and OEM software may be able to be used in this way, the rights to do it are not included with those licenses. There's a bit more flexibility given in the next row too, since if an organisation buys, say, Office Professional Plus through their volume licensing agreement, they could choose to deploy the Mac version of Office if that was required. Now, today, Office 2016 actually includes the traditional Office Standard 2016 and Professional Plus 2016 products, as well as the Office 365 applications. And this slide compares them all for us. And you can see that there are 2 options for customers who want to buy their Office applications through Office 365. Now, why might they want to do this? Well, it's a user licensing model, so both Office 365 Business and Pro Plus are licensed with user subscription licenses, and you can see that this means that they are allowed to install Office on lots of different devices. Look at the bottom of the table where you can see they're allowed to install Office on up to 5 PCs or Macs, 5 smartphones and 5 tablets. Surely enough for the keenest user. But what about feature updates for Office? We saw that Windows has gone to a servicing model with continuous updates, but how does this work for Office? Well, here you can see that we've split the updates into the security and feature ones, as we did for Windows, and for the security updates it works in exactly the same way. These are delivered on a monthly basis as needed. And then for the feature updates, the Office 365 editions are on either the current branch, where updates are delivered as soon as they're available, or on the current branch for business, where they're deferred. Note that Office 365 Pro Plus is on the current branch for business as a default, but it could be changed to the current branch if a business preferred that. And then for Office Standard and Professional Plus 2016, there's no notion of branches. It's the way it's always been. If you buy an Office license without SA, then you can use that version forever, but you get no feature updates. And if you buy it with SA, then you're entitled to use Office 2020 or whatever it's going to be called when it's released. And our final slide on Office looks at the availability, and again I won't dwell on every item in this table, but you can see that the Office Standard and Professional Plus 2016 licences aren't available through the online services programmes, of course, and Office 365 Business, which is aimed at smaller organisations, isn't available through the Enterprise Agreement or MPSA, which are themselves aimed at the larger organisation. That brings us to the end of our session on the licensing of Windows and Office that make up the modern desktop. And your next step, of course, is to go and take the online exam and continue working towards the MLSS accreditation. I do hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I do wish you the very best of luck when you take the associated exam.